Thank you so much for joining today's webinar, New York Cannabis Licensing Update. Today, we're focusing on adult use conditional cultivation license. Finally, New York, we've got adult use application live, first of many to come, but this first one is a conditional cultivation license, so a little different, not necessarily expected of what we thought would be coming first in New York. There was a bill that got this through the door, up and running very, very quickly, so very excited to have this exciting opportunity. I'm going to say the word exciting a lot, so anyone who's playing a drinking game along at home, just get prepared right now. Really excited once again for this opportunity. So I'm going to have my panelists introduce themselves after I go first. So my name is Michelle Bodian, counsel with law firm Vicente Cedarburg. I sit out of our New York and Boston offices, so kind of doing double duty there. But I want to turn things over to Brandon and Jen to introduce themselves as we kind of round out the New York team. Brandon, if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Michelle. My name's Brandon Kurtzman. I'm a partner out of the New York Boston office, and I've been doing a lot of work recently on New York licensing and getting ready for the rest of the licensing rounds, in addition to working on some conditional cultivator licenses. So I'm also very excited to be here. So everybody can take another sip right there.
Yeah, there you go.
And hi, Jennifer Cabrera. I'm in the New York office of Vicente Cedarburg and working exclusively with clients that are preparing and applying for license applications in New York and New Jersey. Thanks very much for having me.
All right, so quick overview. Very similar to what you saw in the webinar announcement, where we're going to touch on briefly, where we are in New York, just take a minute to reflect back. Then we're going to do the deep dive into the conditional cultivation license, catch you up to speed on everything you need to know to apply for this license. Kind of take a look at, all right, this is what we know from the first adult use application released. What does this mean for the rest of the market of what's to come in New York? And then we can't talk about what's going on in New York without touching on the conditional retail licenses. Right now, we do have some draft applications out for public comment, so do want to talk about that, since obviously once you grow it, gonna have to be able to sell these products somewhere. And then we are recording this session. We are going to have question and answers at the end, and there's a little Q&A function in Zoom, so feel free to drop your questions in there. So with that in mind, I'm going to kick it over to myself, awkwardly, to give you a quick update on implementation, and then we'll be each talking about certain slides, going back and forth. So quick update on where we are today. For you all of the details, but in terms of standing up the market and implementing on the cultivation side, obviously what brought you here today for this webinar, we do have adult use conditional cultivator licenses available. Those applications are out, they're live. The application period opened recently 2 weeks ago on March 15th. As well as with that application, New York hasn't done regulations for this new and exciting application. This has gone right to policies and procedures, as well as terms and conditions. That's essentially everything you need to know, operating like mini regulations to actually compliantly operate this type of license. And then on the retail side of things, as I mentioned, we have draft regulations that are out for public comment. And this is for a new license type, adult use conditional retail or dispensary would be that license type. Now I'm actually going to kick it over to Brandon to highlight what's going on and how you apply for this new license.
Thanks, excuse me. Thanks, Michelle. I saw a couple of questions came in already, and I think that if you kind of stay tuned, I think we'll be able to answer a lot of them just through the presentation. So I guess first and foremost, it's important to know who is eligible for this adult use conditional cultivator license. The sort of the main thing, or the main things, is that you have to have been authorized to grow hemp under the Department of Ag and Markets Industrial Hemp Research Pilot Program. And you need to be in good standing with that department. And you have to have been authorized to grow cannabinoid or CBD hemp as opposed to growing hemp for grain or fiber or industrial uses. And then in terms of how much you have to have grown, or when you have to have grown cannabinoid or CBD hemp for 2 of the past 4 years. And as part of the application, you have to provide the OCM with documentation indicating that that is actually the case. And then the ownership qualifications require that a 51% or more ownership in the entity that held the industrial hemp grower authorization from the Department of Ag and Markets. So the individual who had the license to grow hemp needs to hold at least 51% of the entity that is going to apply for this license, or unless it's the same entity. So we can go to the next slide now. Kind of here's a good overview. The deadline to apply for this application, so this will close on June 30th, 2022. And the estimate is that it'll take 3 to 8 weeks for OCM to review, and then it'll go to the commissioners, the CCB, the commission, to approve. Where can you grow? So you have to grow the cannabis within the same or an adjacent county where the licensee has been previously authorized to grow hemp. And then it's important to realize that this license only allows for cultivation either outdoors or in a greenhouse. So there's no indoor cultivation that's occurring here. The size limits in terms of canopy, so it's 1 acre, 43,560 square feet of flowering canopy, which is basically defined as a defined boundary where you're going to be growing the canopy, or 25,000 square feet of flowering canopy in a greenhouse. If you're going to be doing it in a greenhouse, often people are like, well, can I use artificial light? You can. You can use up to 20 artificial lights during the cultivation of cannabis. There are restrictions on the type of equipment that you can purchase, and some exceptions if the lights had already been installed prior to submitting the application, or you use it before the application was submitted. So obviously this is conditional. So the license is valid for 2 years from the date of license issuance, and it will be invalid after June 30th, 2024, at which point you'll have to apply for an adult use cultivation license, a full license, which we talk about later on. Go to the next slide, please. Some other big questions. So the cultivation license, there's also a conditional processing license that's been contemplated, but we haven't received any. That license is not available yet. So the adult use or the conditional cultivator license allows a bit of processing. So you can manufacture and distribute cannabis flower products without holding a processor license or the conditional processor license until June 1st, 2023. So that's cannabis flower products is products that can be made that would not involve a solvent-based extraction process. So pre-rolls is kind of a good example of that. Who can you sell the products to? The operational cannabis retailers. And so that's going to be, likely, well, it'll be a combination of the people who are licensed under the conditional retail license, and then really any other retailers that will be open and licensed by the OCM. But you cannot sell directly to members of the public. And then, what happens after expiration? So you basically have to submit for a full adult use cultivator license and indicate that you have been operating compliantly with the regulations or the law, and that will has a lot of different aspects, environmental regulations, compliance regulations, and a whole host of other laws and regs that you're going to have to maintain while you're operational and then use to show that you've been compliant. I think that I'm going to pass it off now. Or is this my last slide?
No, this is me.
Okay. All right. Michelle, turn it over to you.
Yeah, very smooth transition, Brandon. Love it. Thank you. All right, so that was the initial aspect of, how you qualify and what you can do once you are qualified. So once you receive this license, in terms of restrictions, just hitting on once again, given that right now for the first year, you can do limited processing, highlighting you're not allowed to perform any extractions until when you hold an adult use conditional processor license. So right now, webinar focused conditional cultivation, but at some point, OCM and CCB will also start licensing conditional processors. As the name says, they'll be able to actually start processing edibles and digestibles, doing extraction in a lot more detail. But under this conditional cultivation for a 1-year period, you're able to do some light processing, but clear what that light processing is. It is not actually doing extractions, not making waxes, oils, or edibles. It is just doing light drying and essentially pre-rolls. The state hasn't indicated a cap on the number of these licenses they will give out. Obviously, kind of self-limiting cap here, given the qualifications of having grown hemp for a certain number of years. There's only, so many individuals and entities who would even be eligible to apply. So that's going to be the self-limiting cap. But of that, the state, will award as many of these licenses to as many individuals as, hit the qualifications. And then, a couple other things to be aware of, obviously a whole host of operational details. Brandon talked about some environmental considerations, but, besides those considerations, within 6 months of licensure, the licensee needs to enter into a peace labor agreement with a bona fide labor organization. This is not unique for this class of license. This will be for all the various license types, but just to be aware as the one going first that you're going to need to enter into it, as well as the fact that the law that authorized this conditional cultivation license did include language that the licensee must participate in a social and economic mentorship program. We don't have the details of what that membership is going to look like, but just be aware if you're going for this application and you ultimately receive the license, at some point you're going to be told what that program looks like. Not going to have a lot of control there. You're just going to need to follow along and comply with what those rules are. And in terms of the application itself, so to be aware, New York is using an e-license portal. So you would need to generally register, your business entity first, just general information about the business, who you are, who's applying, and then you'd be doing this particular license type. For those of you who are on the cannabinoid retail or distribution networks here in New York, this is the same portal you've been using to do your cannabinoid hemp retailer and your cannabinoid distributor license. So same portal, same layout, and this is an e-license portal that's used for a number of various licenses throughout New York State. So all of the information is contained there. The OCM website does have an application mock-up, but best to set up an account, start playing around in the portal and get comfortable with what's in there, as well as if any updates or changes that's going to be going in the portal. So type of information that's going to be required: primary contact information, address, business location, pretty basic there, but obviously be aware with business location, there is a restriction that you can only cultivate adult use in the same county or neighboring counties for which you are authorized to grow hemp. So make sure that business location, is within the same or neighboring county. Then you're going to need to provide a business description of the business plan as well as cultivation plan. And this is the only kind of narrative component to this application. There's going to be a lot more narrative detail that comes later once you receive your licensure. Within 6 months of licensure, you're going to have to put together a whole lot of detail of how you're actually going to execute. For application purposes, though, it's limited to your business and cultivation plan. And there is a space in the application to fill out some information, but certainly recommend you actually write a document and upload it, and rather than try to fill it in the tiny box that's provided, as well as make sure your spell checking and everything is all organized in a nice neat package to OCM. And then in terms of what's required for who you are as the entity, you're going to need to provide ownership and financial disclosure, including organizational structural details. You have to provide an organizational chart, a cap table, and then disclosures of any sources of proposed sources of income. And New York does, within their FAQ, reserve the right to have this information be updated on an ongoing basis in case you do any change of control or change of ownership. And again, new market, new application, OCM and CCV learning as they go. So we do anticipate more information is going to come out about adding people to the cap table, getting investors, all of that. So this is about all we know at this point, just to keep that in mind. Things are fluid and they're going to change. Obviously, most important here, you're going to have to provide documentation proving you actually were licensed by DAM to cultivate cannabinoid hemp, for the requisite 2 years that you've actually harvested product. Again, documentation proving you grew and harvested for 2 of the past 4 years. Some of that documentation can be your pre-harvest report, your research license, your application, your post-harvest reports. You really want to provide that paperwork while you might be thinking, hey, it's New York, shouldn't they be talking to each other? Shouldn't OCM talk to DAM and communicate? But you really need to prove to OCM you were licensed. At least 51% of the licensed hemp grower, is owner of this company, and here's the proof you actually check all the boxes and can receive this license. Don't rely upon New York to find the paperwork. You have to submit the paperwork. Then you also need to provide a cultivation and site plan for each proposed location where you're going to grow, harvest, dry, store, or handle. And, obviously just think about this as the supply chain. That first year, you're allowed to do some minimal processing. So you think about it, where you're going to grow. Then once you grow it, where are you going to put it? How are you going to dry it? Where are you going to trim it? And then, given the fact that we are waiting for retailers to come online for the ability to sell, where are you going to store it to, maintain the integrity of the product as well as, safety, so no one can get in there. And, with how you're going to show this for site plans, does include floor plans, aerial photographs, as well as GPS coordinates. It doesn't talk about right now in the application whether these floor plans and aerial, photographs need to be professionally done or can be hand drawn. But obviously, in the intent here is to understand where on the property this activity is going to take place and understand the square footage. So the more professional, more detailed you can provide this information, the better the odds of getting things approved. And then, as I mentioned, there's terms and conditions, which, because there are no regulations right now, OCM is providing information in a couple different forms and fashions. So one of those are terms and conditions, essentially a contract between you and the state, you promising to operate under certain conditions. So part of the application, you got to check the box and you need to actually attest that you will comply with these rules known as the terms and conditions. And of course, application fee, $2,000 non-refundable to apply here. So you need to make sure you're in a position to provide that payment with the application. There's a lot more information, but this is the highlights of the most notable pieces here. And then, I mentioned from this, as I said, first New York adult use application to come online. So from this, really can look forward and kind of figure out what the rest of the market in New York is going to look like. First and foremost, always an open question when a new state comes online. Are we going to be doing paper apps? Is it going to be an e-license portal? I think this answered the question. It's going to be using an e-license portal in New York to apply for any adult use cannabis license. So get familiar with the Business Express application portal. You can sign up as a dummy account, as an individual, as a business, whether you're going for this license or another license type. I do recommend you start getting comfortable in that portal if you're planning on applying in New York State for any of the various adult use licenses, or as I mentioned, for cannabinoid hemp retailer license. On top of this, what we see in these draft regulations, and Jen will certainly touch on some of the innovations going on in the retail side, but they're really innovating in New York State. They're not looking at other states' precedent for a copy paste. Obviously these later states coming online, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, they have plenty of precedent to look at of how other states have done it in more mature markets. You might be thinking it's easy enough. Oh, Massachusetts nearby, are they just copying, pasting their regs? But, based upon what we've seen so far for these conditional cultivation ones, New York is trying to innovate, pushing the envelope, thinking outside the box, 5 other buzz phrases and catchphrases there, but they're trying to do things differently. So I'd say here, prediction, expect the unexpected. I think this market is going to look very different than any other market. this one might seem obvious, but, time and time again, not only in the law, not only in, the seeding opportunity that has come out from the governor in these regs and the conditional retailer regs, but, pay it forward component with social equity mentorship. So not enough to prioritize certain individuals for certain licenses, but really wanting an emphasis on the job training and having that be a core component for receiving a license. So definitely an interesting take there. And then lastly, a topic near and dear to my heart. So super heavy environmental focus. Obviously, this conditional cultivation license limiting the number of light bulbs, outdoor cultivation, therefore, minimizing the environmental impact for power usage. Some of the criteria that have been outlined for transition from the conditional license to full license talks about whether or not you've minimized your carbon footprint. So having carbon footprint in a consideration for a cannabis license to convert from conditional to adult use, I think is really setting the tone for the rest of the industry and what adult use is going to look like in New York. Huge emphasis on sustainable practices and essentially rewarding those businesses that are able to operate in a light touch on the environment aspect. So, a lot of other lessons to learn. I'm sure we'll keep learning them as we go, but those are just 4 to hit on for now. And with that in mind, that was the super abridged version of conditional cultivation licenses. So once you grow the product, as we keep saying, you're going to have to hold it until there's a retailer for you to sell it to, either one of the registered organizations, the medical operator switching to adult use, or one of these newly licensed retail operators. I'm going to hand it over to Jen to talk about what that looks like.
Thanks, Michelle. So that was a really comprehensive overview of conditional cultivation in New York. So switching gears to retail, we don't have any retail license applications available right now. Those aren't going to be available for some months, but obviously there's a lot of interest in it because most of us interact with the cannabis market as consumers by going to our dealer and having it delivered to us. In New York right now, of course, all of that cannabis is not, some of it's grown in the state, most of it is not. When we switch to an adult use regulated cannabis market, that means it all has to be grown in state. So everything that those conditional cultivators are growing is then going to be sold on to the retail market. So this is what the rules are like to get one of those retail licenses. So it's incredibly restrictive. These are conditional retail licenses. New York will have regular full retail licenses available at some point in the future, but it's not clear when. We also don't have regulations for regular retail licenses, only for this one class of conditional retail licenses. So I'll dive into what that actually means. These are only available to individuals who who live in New York State and who are justice involved. There's also the possibility of certain kinds of nonprofits being able to get these licenses, but it's a fairly small number of organizations that would actually qualify. So let's dive into the first group. Next slide, please, Jen. In order to qualify for this license, the vast majority of people who will qualify will fall into this bucket. They need to have a significant presence in New York State. They need to have a company organized in the state, and a majority of the owners need to be residents. They need to spend the majority of their time here. So next slide. You need to have at least one individual who is justice involved, which is a term that doesn't appear in the MRTA, the legalization bill, but it does appear in these conditional regulations. A justice involved individual is somebody who has a marijuana related offense in New York State prior to the date of the MRTA being enacted, which means prior to March 31st, 2021. It doesn't include justice involved individuals, do not include anyone who was just arrested or had an ACD. Like if you had an ACD, it might have felt like you got the golden ticket at the time. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean you're a justice involved individual now. And of course, arrests are really damaging, and it's not enough here. You also don't qualify if your conviction was in another state. You also don't qualify if your conviction was under federal law. So if you found yourself before the SDNY and there were any federal charges involved, convictions involved, then you don't qualify, unfortunately. So it's a really small subset of the many people in New York who have cannabis convictions that will actually qualify. But if you do have a New York marijuana conviction from before March of last year that was under state law, then you very likely are a justice involved individual. And it doesn't matter how long ago this conviction was. You need to provide that you were where your primary residence was at the time of your conviction. And then just to throw in an added sort of requirement, hoop for you to jump through, the justice involved individual also must have business experience, successful business experience, which means that they have at least 2 years, they must have at least 10% of a company that has been profitable for at least 2 years of its existence. And when I first read these regulations, in fact, when me and Michelle were first going through them together, we thought, does this mean you need to have had a profitable drug business for 2 years? No, it doesn't need to have been your cannabis business. This can be your construction company or the laundromat that you owned or whatever it is, but you need 10% ownership of that business, and it needs to have been profitable for at least 2 years. And there, the state is just looking for people that have business experience. That's who they want to give these licenses to. Next slide, please. So that is the one type of entity way you can qualify. The other is if you are a nonprofit, a New York-based nonprofit. And as you can see, you have a number of requirements here. So it needs to be a 501c3 organization recognized as such by the IRS. It needs to work with justice-involved individuals or communities with historically high levels of arrests and conviction, incarceration, so forth. They need to have been in operation for at least 2 years during which they were profitable, or because you're a nonprofit, probably weren't profitable, but you had net assets. And it has justice involved board members and officers, 5 full-time employees. This is not an organization that you can create to satisfy these requirements. You have to have already been in operation. And there will be a few that qualify here. So I want to move on from this because I think it's going to catch a lot fewer people. So actually, I want to go back up to the number 2, slide 13, Jen, if you don't mind. So to be this, the category most people fall into, right, is a company that has a justice-involved individual who has this business experience, right? They don't need to own 100% of the company. They need to own at least 51% of the company. So they can bring on investors. You can bring on your money from New York or from out of state, whatever. You also need to have this justice involved individual. They need to, let me pull up the language, there's some very confusing language on this actually. Bear with me. They need to have sole control over the business, which is a wee bit confusing. I apologize. Yes, an individual, a justice-involved individual must own at least 30% of the applicant and have sole control of the applicant. So that's something that would need to be accounted for in your operating agreement, right? And also how it's structured. And the reason it talks about 30% versus 51%, because you could have multiple justice-involved individuals, but at least one of those individuals must have that sole control and have 30%. So this is something, if you do qualify, I think it makes sense, reach out to a lawyer and talk to them ASAP. So sorry, Jen, we can move back down to slide 15. Thank you. All right, so let's say you qualify, hooray. What does it mean? So you've probably heard about New York having a $200 million cannabis fund, which is really novel and impressive because New York is trying to troubleshoot and avoid the problems that have plagued social equity programs in other states. So they have created this fund. We don't really have many details of it, but the funds will be going to buy up property across the state, which will then be leased to conditional retail license holders. That's right. So if you qualify for this conditional retail license, you qualify for a space provided to you by the Office of Cannabis Management or whatever fund is created here. Do you have to lease from them? It looks like you do, but the regulations are a little unclear. And this is something that we really hope to get more clarity from the Office of Cannabis Management about. Because there's talk about landlords, but it's not clear you can have your own landlord. It looks like you are assigned a landlord by the state. You're also eligible for loans, presumably low interest loans from the state. So this is the way you avoid the capital requirements that really plague new cannabis businesses. So let's say you qualify, you want to open up. Let's say you live in the Bronx. Does this mean you get a location in the Bronx? No. You hopefully can. So this OCM is going to create geographic zones, divide the state into zones. We don't know how big those zones are. We don't know how many there will be. We know nothing about it yet other than the fact that they intend to create them. You will select in your application which zone you want to be in. They will try to honor your request. You may not get it. You may get a place in Syracuse, not in Bronx. So that is going to be one thing. Let's say you go through all these hoops, you qualify, you show you have this business prowess and experience. You may not get the location you want, but still, it's probably reduced rent, low interest loans, and a facility. So you could go there. We also don't know exactly how many of these licenses the state is going to be giving out. The preliminary numbers we're hearing is around 150, mainly because I think the idea is that's how many the state thinks they can fund in terms of properties with $200 million. So the same regulations, restrictions that apply to retail businesses under the MRTA apply to these conditional retail businesses, right? So you can have up to 3 licenses, which is great and a real improvement over what New Jersey across the river is doing, where you can only have 1 retail license. You cannot have an interest in any cultivation, manufacturing, processing, or distribution licenses. So here they're trying to avoid vertical integration. You also couldn't have an interest in a micro business, for instance, if you're doing this conditional retail license. And you can only buy from the regulated New York market. This is the key difference with any legacy operators now who are able to buy from California or somewhere else on the West Coast. No, you are buying from the hemp to THC cannabis growers that Michelle just described. And they will be up and running and they will have product to sell by the end of this year. So there will be options there. That also means that initially there won't be any, my blind is blanking, but any oils or anything that involves extraction. You'll probably just be able to buy flour and pre-rolls, at least initially in the New York legal market. Of course, so you can't buy from out of state, you're just stuck here. Another factor that I wanted to raise is that when you join this program, you are in it for 4 years. The term of a conditional license is 4 years, and it's not clear that you can really transition. In fact, it seems clear to me that in the regulations, you can't transition from the conditional license to a regular license before that time is up. If you want to switch to a retail license, you either wait your 4 years or you effectively renounce your conditional license, vacate your premises, come up with a plan to wind up your business, and then apply for a retail license. So if you get in this program, you're on a track. So it's really innovative, and I really very much appreciate how much effort is being put in to having this access for most New Yorkers. But it's definitely, you're not going to have the same freedom that you would if you had a regular retail license. So next slide, please. What is the timing here? These conditional retail regulations, and I put the link to those in the chat. Those became available sometime in early March. I don't remember exactly when, maybe it was mid-March, but either way, they were only published in the New York State Register last Wednesday, a week ago. And there's a 60-day public comment period that they're subject to. That is going to close May 29th, 2022. The link that I put in the chat, that goes straight to the OCM website, and it contains the procedure for making public comment. So if you do have comments, you can send them to that email address that is on the, well, it's gone now. That is on through the OCM. It's the regulations@ocm.ny.gov by May 29th. Now, what happens if the OCM receives so many comments and they say, wow, we really should change some of these things. Maybe we should allow federal convictions. Maybe we should allow out-of-state convictions. That means that the OCM needs to, after public comment closes on May 29th, reissue new regulations, which will in turn be subject to another 60-day period. So if there are substantial revisions, we won't see applications until probably early next year. If the OCM just proceeds with these regulations more or less as written, then we could see applications available by the end of summer or early fall. So that is probably our best hope for early licensing in New York. If there aren't substantial changes, though I'm not sure that we'll be able to actually proceed that way. So that's all I have on the retail side. I guess unless Michelle or Brandon had anything they wanted to add.
Thanks, Jen. Appreciate that. And this is obviously the conditional retailer licenses. New York, as a reminder, still working on all of the non-conditional, essentially normal licenses and applications that are coming out. So there is a chance those might also be published relatively soon, now that New York is ramping up all of their regulations and applications. It seems right now that there is a ton of questions pouring in via the chat and the actual question and answer. So I think at this point, maybe if I can invite everybody back and we can start actually diving into some of these questions. Excuse me. I guess starting with some of these questions that are coming in on the retailer aspect.
Could answer quickly the bona fide labor org.
Sure.
So you do need to have a labor peace agreement in place. You're going to just want to work with one of the large organizations that are currently representing cannabis workers in New York, which includes Teamsters, UFCW. There are a few other smaller ones. So I would advise just doing your research, but that's where to start.
Yeah, perfect. And obviously with this, we're waiting for a lot more details, at least on the conditional cultivation side, as well as the rest of the market, waiting on more details about social equity mentorship, bona fide peace labor agreement. All of this would be step 2 after you've received the license. So New York trying to rush things out, get it done quickly. So they're hyper focused on the application, and they're certainly, kicking the can down the road for some of these other detailed aspects. All right, I will play moderator and start teeing up some questions. So let's see, will a hemp processor be licensed this year to offer extracts? So Brandon, can I ask you, we've got the conditional cultivation application live. Certainly there's supposed to be a conditional processor application and license. Best guess, when do we think that license will come online?
I would say my best guess would be it's unclear if there'll be draft regulations for the processing license, or they'll just create amendment to the law like they did for the conditional cultivation application. I would say that we will have more information on this midsummer.
All right, let's hold them to that, everyone. Seems reasonable. All right, let's see, next question. Oh, that's about recording webinar. All right, that one's easy. How about maybe Jen, if the second comment period is triggered, if it's even for 45 days, do you think that would, drastically reduce what this market could look like if things are slowed down with a second public comment period?
Well, I mean, fair enough. It could be 45 to 60 days for a second comment period, but that's a 15-day difference. I think having that second comment period does push this out for close to 2 months, but yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then I'll ask myself a question because I get to cherry pick the questions by moderating. So one of them was about the number of licensed hemp growers that would be eligible. The Department of Ag and Markets does post a list of current licensees. However, the catch there, in order to qualify, you need to have been licensed by December 31st. Those familiar with the application process in New York, there's reasons some people may not have applied yet, either paperwork reasons or the transition from the 2014 program, the research focused program, to the 2018 Farm Bill program. So all of that's to say, I do believe the number overall of licensed hemp growers in New York State was approximately 800. Of that, given the fact that you need to have cultivated for cannabinoid hemp, not industrial purposes, and then again, the fact that you need to have grown and harvested for a certain number of years, I do believe that number is closer to around 200 who may be eligible. But again, sounds like someone in the chat may have done a Freedom of Information Act request, not exactly sure the exact ask there, but I am going on record of saying approximately 200 licensed hemp growers who may be eligible to apply for this license type. Jen, if I can ask you, you did mention on the convictions versus arrest versus ACD, if you could just explain what that acronym means.
Of course, an ACD is an adjournment in contemplation of dismissal. It's basically you have your case dismissed in exchange for something like probation for a year. And so if you were a young person caught up with cannabis, that's a great way to keep your record clean, but it's not a conviction.
Perfect, thank you. And certainly if you're entering this industry, time to get up to speed with acronyms, because it's only going to get worse from here on out. It looks like, Brandon, there's some questions going on in the chat about the definitions of greenhouse, hoop house, indoor cultivation, outdoor cultivation. Is there any resources New York has put out that might help explain what all these words mean?
Yeah, there is, Michelle. So the FAQs and the terms and conditions on the OCM's website, and I think I answered a question and had a link to the terms and conditions for like the definition of lighting, and answered, has a clarification on sort of the differences and how to differentiate between indoor versus outdoor versus both. So that's where I would go to get the specifics there, just to save time. It also has the definition of a greenhouse. So
great, thank you. And with that, on the OCM's website, Brandon mentioned the FAQ. So notably, they've already updated it once. So if you do have specific questions on this process, email OCM. There is now a licensing email address, OCM.licensing at, I believe it's cannabis.gov. We'll put all of this in the follow-up email you'll all get. But essentially, if you have any of these questions, do ask OCM, because they are fielding questions throughout this process, as well as updating the FAQ to actually try to answer, as it says, frequently asked questions to try to inform this. So this is live and evolving, and they'll keep providing answers. Obviously, the more of us asking, the more likely it is they'll update that document to be usable. All right, and then let's see some other questions. Just scrolling up.
I could speak to the control piece and management agreements.
Yeah, go for it.
So basically, I think we don't really know the details too much yet, but for a management agreement, we have to assume that they are going to, well, we know that they're going to have to be disclosed, and they're also going to want to see that the management company doesn't have decision-making control over the business. And that means that like either the justice involved individual is appointed as the manager, meaning the day-to-day decision maker if you have an LLC, or that they, if they control 51%, that they have that majority, and that majority decision making is possible. So these are all things in your operating agreement that can be done to indicate like day-to-day control by the justice involved individual. Another one would be to ensure to just check on the division of profits and losses, because the state is going to be scrutinizing that. And so ensuring that 51% ownership is more or less equal to 51% share of the profits, maybe after an operator's expenses are recouped, that is one way to do it.
Great, thank you. And I see someone saying OCM has not responded to them. There also is an 800 number. I won't guarantee they're going to have an answer, but that's another resource to call and ask opportunities. And I would say, you know, they're busy, they're overwhelmed, but if you keep emailing, you will get a reply. It just might take a bit of time. I guess, Brandon, I know I kicked it to you about definitions. So while we're on that topic, you know, talking about hoop houses versus greenhouses, you know, what is the thinking of New York State between indoor grow versus outdoor grow? Do you think heat source or power sources are what's making the difference here of what someone in New York might view as indoor versus outdoor cultivation?
It seems like lighting is going to be a big differentiator in terms of like what's considered indoor versus outdoor. So I think that if you have a sort of a greenhouse or a hoop house space that exceeds what you're allowed to have for the allowable lighting, then that's going to be considered an indoor grow. So I think that, you know, beyond or if you just fall way outside of the definition of a greenhouse, which is a structure of thermally isolated enclosed area of a building that maintains a specialized sunlit environment used for and essential to the cultivation, protection, or maintenance of plants. So it's kind of a, you know, it's not a very specific definition. I think it's going to basically come down to how many lights you're using in order to qualify.
Great, thank you. A question on timing. Conditional grow license application review is 3 to 8 weeks with OCM. And I will say originally they hadn't even put a time frame on that. And the latest FAQ said 3 to 8. So that could continue adjusting. The question is, how long do you predict for CCB to review beyond that? I guess I'll take this one. Right now, CCB isn't meeting when a regular cadence, you know, again, talking about other states, some states meet the first Tuesday of the month. There, you know, some predictability. So right now we don't have that predictability, but it does seem like they're meeting at least once a month. So I would say count for at least 4 weeks after that 3 to 8 week period. All of that's to say, if you're trying to do anything this growing season, the sooner you can get all of this in your application buttoned up, the better, just to kick off OCM's review and then wait for that next CCB meeting. Because obviously, you know, we're already in April and we got to get plants in the ground to get through as long as we have for the growing season upstate. All right, it looks like there's a lot of questions on canopy and how to describe indoor and outdoor, and I'm gonna just apologize on behalf of all my panelists now. You know, while we're trying to hit as many questions as possible, I'm not sure we're gonna be able to get in all of the nitty gritty of this today, but let me at least throw our contact information. There we go. So you can follow up with us with any of the questions you may have. More than happy to try to answer them as well. Obviously, we're assisting clients with actually going through this process. So, you know, if you have more direct questions or actually want help with your applications, you know, more than happy to discuss that. So gotta make that plug there. But I'll flip back, but it does seem like there's a lot of questions and confusions about how to describe things. And I don't know if we can give blanket answers to this. We're going to have to talk about your specifics. So I guess just scrolling up, one of the questions is talking about the can a hemp cultivator sell to a hemp processor? And I'm going to take that to mean, can a conditional cultivator for adult use sell to a conditional processor once those licenses are available? If either of you want to take that question.
I mean, I would assume so, just to maintain that supply chain. You know, the conditional cultivator grows, then the conditional processor processes, and the conditional retailer sells. So I'd say yes, but TBD.
Yeah, I don't know where else the conditional processors would get their product legally. So I think that's right.
Yep. It seems to be how it's set up. All right, perfect.
I could talk to the difference between a micro license and a regular retail license. We don't really know much about the micro license other than it's described in the law, and it is a vertical license. It's so cultivation, processing, distribution, and retail. I believe you might have to do it all at the same location, though I don't remember, and it's probably going to be prioritized for social equity applicants. But again, the definition of that is different from what we're seeing, and like it's not the same as a justice involved individual. So I would say for micro licenses, it's very much TBD. Whereas a regular license is not vertical. It's either cultivation and processing or it's retail. You can't have all of them together if it's a regular license.
Okay, perfect. And I guess while we're talking non-cultivation, I can hit this one. I've heard that the rec license, which I assume means retail, will be available in approximately 8 months. Anything you can add to this timing? So I think one of our slides, and I can go back to the timing that Jen hit on. So timing of application release, assuming the conditional retailer licenses the regulations stay as they are. Obviously New York now comfortable using the Business Express, the e-license portal, they'll be able to go forward from that time period, no revisions, all of that. We should expect that application to go live in the fall. If there are substantial revisions to the regulations requiring another public comment period, then we're looking at late fall, early winter. So again, all for the conditional retailer. In the meantime, they are working on the normal retailer regulation. So no great visibility into the timing there, other than they are trying to put, this seeding opportunity, meaning farmers first, with then justice involved individuals being able to retail as the first opportunities. We don't know first for the first 12 months, first 24 months, but somehow these are all the licenses that'll be available in the near term. All right, now that I've just asked myself a question, again, Brandon, back to you, I guess, on the timing of that conditional processor license. Do you anticipate that we should see those conditional processor licenses for adult use this calendar year, or are they going to try to give farmers a lot more leeway to do the light processing themselves for a while?
I think that there's going to be some or good reason to move the processing along, because the light processing that the conditional cultivation application allows is solventless. So to the extent that the market will have a demand for marijuana infused products, which it will, you're going to need a processing license to allow for licensees to make marijuana products, not just marijuana flower products, which is what's allowed under the cultivation, the conditional cultivation temporarily. So again, that's why I think summer is sort of the timeline for when we're going to get more information, or maybe that application period will sort of just open up like the way it more quickly like it did for the conditional cultivator.
I could ask a question. What do you guys think is the timing for getting full regulations for the adult use program? Do you think they'll wait until after public comment closes for the conditional, or it will come before then?
I think after. I appreciate you going off book. We did not discuss this in advance. Given the fact that you can accelerate the entire timeline by not doing multiple revisions to regulations, they'd be well served to see the public comments, the initial round, to see the appetite, the comment, the style, get a flavor of what the comments are, and then finalize any draft regs for, kind of the normal, as I'm calling them, adult use regulations.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I agree.
I would also, sorry, Brandon, to cut you off, but we're hyper-focused on this. But if you go to the link Brandon and Jen dropped in the chat for New York's OCM website, have to remember OCM also has medical as well as cannabinoid hemp. And right now, cannabinoid hemp regs need to be finalized, a third revision The medical expansion regs are out. They did do public comment, but they're in the way to be finalized. Also waiting for home cultivation medical regs. So there's just a lot of moving regs for one organization that's trying to staff up and implement as well as execute this conditional. So I do think it's not going to happen before we at least see this comment period close for these first adult use regulations for retail.
Yeah, I'd been expecting to see those regulations around now, around like April or May. And then when these conditional retail regulations came out, I think I agree that this took the place of full regulations. They're testing the waters effectively and want to see how this goes over.
Yeah, and they have to remember this bill hijacked everything, right? When you get a new law, you got to execute what's in it. So these conditional cultivation and processor licenses did, no matter what was planned, this is now #1 agenda item for OCM and CCB, just to keep with the acronyms. All right, we've got a couple minutes left. I'll just flip back to the conditional cultivation application itself. Brandon, are any financials required as part of this application process, or is it just kind of the details we've outlined in the PowerPoint?
So you do need to have an organizational chart to show everybody involved, and then you do have to say where your finances are coming from, but there's no minimum financial requirement for submitting the application outside of the application fee itself.
Great, thank you. And just to reiterate, because I do see a question, this conditional cultivation application opened on March 15th. So we are live in the application period. It'll be open until June 30th. So just want to make sure everyone's aware that there is a deadline to apply if you qualify, if you're looking to find a hemp farmer that does qualify and partner with them and be the minority owner. You are live ticking deadline. So make sure you're comfortable with what's required in the application, what's in that guidance document, the terms and conditions, the FAQ. Bring yourself up to speed, because the sooner you apply, the sooner you can actually capitalize on this growing season. So again, there are a lot of questions in here that we're just not going to be able to answer today, but this is going to be future webinars. If you've been following along with us, certainly we have a heavy tri-state focus, as well as now that New York's gearing up, a lot more webinars coming up with a lot more New York content. You're stuck with us as the leaders in this market, so you're going to see a lot of us and our incredibly lame banter. So buckle up. Although I didn't say exciting as many times as I thought I was going to. So I'll have to bring that forward to the next webinar. But you have our contact information there. Please reach out with any questions. Keep up to date with our blog on our website and our webinar contact. We will certainly keep putting out content to help provide information. And if any of these specific questions we didn't get to, again, shoot us an email. We'll be able to try to answer them best we can, with, of course, providing the disclaimer that, you know, we are not providing legal advice unless we are hired to do so. So with that note, and certainly ending in a legal disclaimer, just to keep it consistent as attorneys and with a law firm, thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Jen and Brandon, for participating. And as other Jen said in the chat, this is recorded. We will send out afterwards the slides, and definitely keep in touch as you guys are working through this process.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.